Imagine picking up a hitchhiker and and then you realize he's a serial killer and
Oh,
uses his car as a weapon.
oh, wow.
That's kind of the chilling reality we're going to be diving into today. The
Okay.
case of Lawrence Paul Mills.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it should be a good one. So for everyone listening, this is going to be a deep dive into the life and crimes of Lawrence Paul Mills, who was born in 1987.
Okay.
He had one kid, and he worked at a pizza place in Michigan.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just real normal stuff, right?
Yeah. Sounds like someone you could meet every day.
Exactly, and that's what's kind of so creepy about this case,
Oh.
because he was very active on social media.
Oh, wow.
He was always posting pictures with his son.
Oh, so creating this like facade of normalcy.
Exactly, a loving father while also committing these brutal murders.
Oh my gosh.
So, okay, let's rewind a little bit. He was born in Garden City, Michigan.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so very normal upbringing, seemingly.
Yeah, very like blend in with the crowd background,
Right.
which makes the crimes even more shocking.
Yeah, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Right.
So how does someone like this go from, posting photos with their son to becoming a cold-blooded killer?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
we may never fully understand the human psyche and why people do things like this, but we can
Yeah.
look at his actions and his methods and maybe try to piece together a picture of his motives.
Yeah, that's a good point. His modus operandi was very unique and horrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. He would solicit prostitutes, engage in sexual acts with them, and then run them over with his car to steal back the money he paid them.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just a pattern of like calculated brutality.
Calculated is right. And sometimes, to make things even worse, he would actually beat the victims before running them over.
Oh my gosh, the level of violence is just unbelievable. Yeah, using a car as a weapon too, it adds another layer to it.
Right.
Almost impersonal.
Yeah, do you think that was part of it? Like, was that detachment?
It could be.
Maybe he saw his victims as, like, obstacles?
Yeah, maybe he dehumanized them.
It was all about getting the money back, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that investigators and psychologists would want to look into.
Definitely. And speaking of the victims, there were two women we know of who were confirmed to have been killed by Mills.
Yes, Melinda Salazar, who was 34 years old and pregnant, and then Carol Ann White, who was 59 years old,
Wow.
both found dead in really tragic circumstances.
So Melinda was found on a sidewalk in southwest Detroit, and Carol Ann was found face down in the snow.
Yes,
I can't imagine what their final moments must have been like.
it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, and especially with Melinda's case, she's pregnant, so it's like a double tragedy.
Right, the loss of two lives, a mother and her unborn child.
And it's just a stark reminder of, the ripple effect of violence, how one person can just devastate so many others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so awful. It makes you wonder, if they were targeted because they were vulnerable.
That's a good point. That's something investigators look at a lot when they're profiling serial killers. Like, are they choosing specific types of people that they think are easy targets?
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought. When we were researching for this episode, there was one story that really stuck with me. It was about a 29-year-old pregnant woman who survived an attack by Mills.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that. That case is so important because not only did she survive, but she was able to help the police catch him.
Yeah, she was beaten and hit with his car like multiple times. And
Wow.
somehow she managed to get away and call the police.
It's amazing she survived that, and even more amazing that she was able to think clearly enough to get help.
I know. It's incredible. It makes you wonder, if hadn't survived, would Mills still be out there?
I think it's definitely possible. Her survival was a huge turning point in the case. It gave the police a lot more to go on.
Yeah, this case is just crazy. Like, every time you think you've got a handle on it, there's another twist.
Right, there's always another layer to uncover.
Exactly. And one of those layers is the possibility that Mills was involved in other crimes too.
Right.
Not just the two we've talked about.
Yeah, there was another case that caught my eye, a 32-year-old woman named Mary Penagore. She was found dead on the same street where Mills had targeted some of his other victims.
Oh, wow. So that seems like a pretty big coincidence.
It does, and it definitely raises questions about whether Mills was involved in her death, too.
Do you think they were ever able to connect him to any other cases?
It's hard to say for sure. Linking a suspect to multiple crimes, especially when there's a lot of time between them, can be really difficult.
Yeah, I imagine it takes a lot of evidence.
Right, they would be looking for anything that could tie him to the scene, like DNA or fingerprints or maybe even witness testimony.
So if they found another victim who had been run over by a car and there was evidence of a sexual encounter, that would be a pretty strong link, right?
Definitely. But even then, it's not always enough. They have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the one who did it.
Wow, it's like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces.
Exactly. But sometimes you get lucky and you find that one piece that makes everything fit.
So how did they finally catch this guy? Investigation must have been going on for a while.
It did. It went on for several years. They were analyzing evidence and looking for patterns, trying to piece together what had happened.
And they finally arrested him on April 24th, 2020.
Yeah, and here's where it gets interesting. He actually confessed to two of the murders.
He did?
but then you pleaded not guilty in court.
Wait, how does that work? He confessed, but then said he didn't do it.
It happens more than you might think. There are a lot of legal strategies at play, and sometimes a defendant might confess to try to get a lighter sentence.
Oh, so it's not always a straightforward admission of guilt.
Right, it can be very complicated, and sometimes confessions can even be challenged in court.
Wow. It sounds like the justice system can be a real maze.
It can be, but it's designed to make sure everyone gets a fair trial.
So what happened at the trial? What was the verdict?
The jury heard all the evidence, and they found Mills guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder and assault, causing a miscarriage, stillbirth, or death.
So even with a confession, they still went through with a whole trial.
Yeah, it's not always a slam dunk, you know.
Right. What was his sentence?
He was sentenced to 28 to 48 years in prison.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, he's currently saving his time at the Macomb Correctional Facility.
28 to 48 years. I mean, is that enough time for the crimes he committed?
That's a really tough question. It's something that people debate all the time. You know, what's a just punishment?
Right.
Is it about revenge, or is it about rehabilitation, or is it talk about protecting society?
Yeah, and for the families of the victims, no amount of time can really bring back their loved ones.
Absolutely. It's a devastating loss. And their pain is something we should never forget.
Yeah, they're not just statistics,
Right?
These were real people with families and friends who loved them.
Exactly.
We've been focusing on all the details of this case, but it feels like there's a bigger picture here.
There is, for sure.
Like, what have you learned from all this?
I think the thing that stands out to me is just how easily Mills was able to blend in.
Right.
He seemed like a normal guy. He had a family, a job, he was active on social media, but underneath it all, he was capable of such horrific violence.
So how do we protect ourselves from people like that?
That's the million-dollar question. I think awareness is a big part of it. You know, paying attention to our surroundings, trusting our gut instincts if something feels off.
It's like you have to be cautious, but you don't want to live in fear.
Exactly. It's a balance. We need to be aware of the dangers, but we don't want to let fear control our lives.
Well, this has been a really heavy deep dive,
It has.
but I think it's important to talk about these things.
I agree. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about why people do these things, the better equipped we are to prevent them from happening in the future.
And for our listeners, if this episode has brought up any difficult emotions or you just want to talk to someone, please reach out for help. There are resources available.
Absolutely. You don't have to go through this alone.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the case of Lawrence Paul Mills.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And remember, even in the darkest of stories, there's always hope. A CFT or CFTS